Hey, this is Jeremy Sherman, and this is Irony is the Truest Medicine, episode 12. Today, I want to stay at the practical human level, deal with a topic that has been on my mind this last couple of weeks as I start to work up a project on vanity management. Vanity for sanity. I think this is probably where the rubber really hits the road on irony being the truest medicine. And I think I can summarize it here, so I'm going to try. When you look at what's going on in the world overall, I would say it's an escalation of the vanity wars that have been going on since the beginning of humankind. Vanity is a human issue. It's one of the seven deadly sins, or so they say, and I am going to be arguing that if we handle it ironically, we'll do a far better job of dealing with human vanity than we do when we disparage it and call it a sin. I think it's inevitable. I think it's natural. I think it's inescapable. It's a human problem, and it would be a problem for any language-using species. I may have already touched on this in this series, but it goes without saying, but bears repeating. So it's a problem for humans. I don't think vanity is much of a problem for other organisms. I don't think it can be, because I don't think they have the capacity to get an inflated ego the way we do, because we have language, because we have concepts, because we have self-concepts, and because we are warding off the chronic imposition of anxiety as human beings. We have language, and language has us trudging through a sandstorm of confidence-eroding possibilities. Everything that we can imagine, all the real and imaginary, past, present, and future threats and missed opportunities that dog us and do not dog a dog. A dog can be a stress bunny, but not conceptually, not the way we can. That's a function of language and how language radically changes the human experience as distinct from the experience of any other organism. I marvel at how many people doubt me when I say that language is unique to humans. I'm still mystified by why that's the case, why so many people say, well, how do you know that animals don't have language? And some of this is probably a function of failure to distinguish language from other forms of communication, other forms of interpretation. So remember, from my perspective, I'm trying to understand how interpretation happens, the emergence and evolution of interpretation. Interpretation is something that organisms do. Yeah, physical things respond when you hit them, but that's not interpretation. That's cause and effect. That's strictly physical, strictly physics. Interpretation is different. A stop sign doesn't cause you to stop unless you crash into it. We interpret it, and we do it symbolically. That is, there's something about stop signs I'll get back to, which is unique to humans. A bug can't make sense of a stop sign, or at least the word stop. It's a social convention that a red hexagon is a stop sign. And language is like that too. But if we start out with what all organisms have, they have two other kinds of signs. That is, two other differences that they can interpret. So the two other kinds of signs, there are three kinds of signs, and I'm going to be simplifying some, but there are three basic kinds of signs. There's icons, there's index, and then there's symbols. And we are the symbolic species because we have symbol competence. That's what's going on when you are listening to these words and understanding them in a way that no other organism possibly can. And not just because it's English and they speak a different language, they work in icons and indexes. So let me describe them and also demonstrate how we build up from icons to indexes to symbols. So icons are where we start. It's a failure to distinguish. It's basically confusing one thing with another because of similarities. Iconicity is the basis for all interpretation. And the very first organism would be one that would barely be able to distinguish between one situation and another. That is, it would start out where everything is everything, and there's no language, no emotions, no responsiveness except the most basic kind of responsiveness. So I've already laid that out in prior episodes of this. Think of the minimal autogen. Remember, this is a chain reaction that happens to put out the molecules that self-assemble into shells that capture some of the chain reaction molecules. And so if it should break open in the presence of more of the food that the chain reaction molecules rely on, then the chain reaction will resume and it will make more chain reaction seeds. That's the minimal autogen. I could go into more detail. I could talk about how it eventually evolves greater responsiveness, but its basic responsiveness is to keep itself the same, that is, self-similarity, self-iconicity, by repairing itself when it breaks open. It regenerates what degenerates. And as I've argued, the minimal capacity any organism would have to have, it would be to protect against degeneration and repair what degenerates about it. Because all organisms, no matter where they are living in an environment where things degenerate, where they degenerate. So they have to be able to protect against degeneration and repair what degenerates, or regenerate what degenerates. Okay, so that's basic responsiveness. It's a failure to distinguish between any situations except when it's broken open, it will tend to repair itself. That's all. And it can't even distinguish between environments where it's wisest to break open and not. It's simply breaking open by happenstance, by degeneration. Okay, so iconicity is basic, and yet it's completely familiar to you, though you probably don't even notice how familiar it is. Nobody does. So try this out. You come back here, you're listening to this voice. This voice is similar, almost indistinguishable from the voice on episode 11. And so what do? You assume it's me. Or let's say you go to work 5 days a week and you work with a guy named David. David is the same as David. I mean, it looks the same, and David is the same. So you just assume that it's David. That's iconicity. Iconicity includes everything from a likeness in a painting or a photograph all the way out to camouflage. Camouflage is iconicity. It's a failure to distinguish. It's not like you sit there and say, wow, look at that. That camouflage looks just like its background. No, it's a failure to distinguish. Just like with Dave at the office, it's a failure to distinguish. Even if he was replaced by his twin brother, you might not even notice. Okay, so that's iconicity. And then if you get iconicities, a collection of them, and then there's a difference in the collection, then you'll get indexicality. It'll point to a difference. So suppose you have sameness, sameness, sameness. Dave comes to work every day, and Dave's got a gray beard because he's an older guy. And then one day he comes to work and he's got a brown beard, like I do. I have a brown beard because of vanity. My hair is still brown and I'm still rounding up to a youthful look to the extent I can. What is that? That's vanity. But anyway, Dave has it too. And the way you would notice it is that you had two experiences that you confused with each other. There was Dave and there was his gray beard, but they weren't, it's not like you said, oh, here's Dave and his gray beard. They were just one experience, but you had it repeatedly, and then there's a difference. And now the gray beard isn't there because he dyed it brown, and you look at it, you notice it. In a way, it points to a difference because you had this association, a correlation in time and space, Dave and his beard, his gray beard, and now they're distinguished because he's put on a brown beard to look more distinguished. You point it out, or you don't if you want to protect his vanity and say nothing about it. But anyway, this is something that organisms all have. They have iconicity and indexicality. And even, for example, trees, they can notice a difference in the seasons. It points to a response. They notice a difference in day length. And it points to a response in their own behavior. That's iconicity and indexicality. But I'm going to give you a more intuitive example of it in Pavlov's dog. So Pavlov's dog has a bell-food relationship that is iconic, that is repeated experiences of Taco Bell. Bell rings, gets a taco. Bell rings, gets a taco. Doesn't distinguish when it says, oh, there's a bell, there's a taco. No, it's an experience that the dog has. And then if you ring the bell, it assumes the taco. Just like if you saw West David, you assumed a gray beard, but now he's got a brown one because he dyes it like me. Okay, I could go on about the relationship between icons and indexes, but basically what you want to think about is that an index is a pointer to a difference that you recognize as a difference from past experiences. And one way to think about it is it's a correlation in time or space. That is, for Pavlov's dog, for example, the bell points or is indexical of food because of correlation in time and space. That is, the bell rang into space and the food immediately followed. Symbols are different, and they are grounded in icons and indexes, as I'll explain, but they are different, and it's important to understand this difference. A dog is iconic of other dogs. That is, you might say, oh, look, they have these traits in common, or you might say, that's the same dog I saw yesterday. And if you heard a dog barking in the next room over, you'd assume there was a dog nearby because of correlation in time and space. So a dog's bark is indexical of the presence of a dog, but symbols are different. The word dog, whether spoken or written, is not iconic of a dog. It doesn't look like a dog. And the word dog doesn't sound like a dog the way the bark does, or smell like a dog. What the hell is it? It's a socially maintained, it's a convention within English that this arbitrary token, the series of letters, which are just tokens, is meant to represent or point to dogs. And you walk around, having trained in English, you walk around with about 20 to 30,000 such arbitrary, socially maintained conventions that you can mix and match to conceive of any. And that is not something that other animals do. They have their unique calls that signal this or that, but it's a limited set, and it's basically indexical. That is, a sound points, like a bell points to food for Pavlov's dog. A sound can point to, let's say, a predator for vervet monkeys. But that's instinctual, or maybe in some cases locally, culturally maintained. Bird calls can be like this, but they are indexical. It's not what you're doing with language. Language is symbolic, and symbolic is a collection of socially maintained conventions that we interpret because we are members, even parasitic on that culture. So how did you learn the word dog? Well, you learned the same way Pavlov's dog learned the association, but it's out a level from that. So you were around dogs as a toddler, and you heard the word dog, and eventually you got to where you pointed your finger at dogs and said your best attempt at the word dog. And it was by trial and error that you finally refined it enough to be able to use the word successfully to get across what you wanted to get across. If you were scared of a dog, you might point to a dog and you'd say dog, or you'd cry and you'd say some word and maybe your parents didn't understand what it was. You were scared of the dog, and finally you figured out how to utter the token, the arbitrary social sign, made clear what the dog was to your parents. That is, your reference succeeded. And at some point, you achieved liftoff from the index finger. You no longer needed the index finger to point because you could say, mommy's doggy, or my friend's dog. The dog didn't have to be nearby. The dog could even be conceptual. You could end up reading children's books about Bluey the dog, or watching cartoons about Bluey, a dog that doesn't actually exist. Notice how you've achieved liftoff from the kind of interpretation that can happen through icons and indexes. Because here you're actually working in the abstract. You've achieved liftoff. And with that vocabulary and the syntax by which you can mix and match all sorts of words, you can conceive of anything. That's the human gift. It's also the human burden. And why we are such an anxious species and why we are such a delusional and vain species. They come paired. That's what you get for being human. Driving under the influence of symbols is that you have a whole conceptual range, an infinite conceptual range, not available to any other organism. So while they deal with reality and their realities outdoors and all that is rougher in some ways than ours, we live in reality and the world of our anxious, delusional, vain minds. And the question becomes what to do about that, how to manage our vanity for sanity. That's the theme I'm trying to get at here, which is if we just would appreciate what goes on for us human beings as compared to other organisms. I mean, we barely think about the fact that we have this unique capacity. And like I say, it's just astonishing to me how many people deny it. I've been reading recently a history of thought about evolution and about human behavior around the time of Darwin, before, during, and after Darwin's expose. And Darwin is really struggling with these questions about the descent of man from other animals. And the way the story is normally told is that it was very controversial. And sure, it was in some circles, but before Darwin, there were theologians who were exploring the parallels between us and other primates. And Darwin is struggling to try to understand it because we seem so radically different. And so I'm reading these quotes from Darwin and from his notes and from the people around him, and they're talking about our rational capacity and our motivations and our moral capacity, completely ignoring our linguistic capacity. It's just astonishing. I go back further than that. I've been reading a lot of the older explorations of what we are, and it's just amazing. These are people who are working in language, trying to figure out what we are. They're trying to interpret our capacity for interpretation and how to interpret right. And they're doing it all in language, and they don't notice that they're doing it in language. It's very rare to find some philosopher back then who's actually thinking about it. There are a few who are saying, language seems to make a big difference, but I'm saying it makes a huge difference and makes us the radically moral and immoral, rational and rationalizing, moral and moralizing animals we are. And it's confusing as fuck to be a human because we have language and can imagine anything. So I come back to this. We're driving under the influence of symbols, and they make us really anxious. It makes us FOMO sapiens. Let me be clear about why. This fear of missing out would be such a big deal for us. With language, we can imagine infinity. Infinity is actually technically, physically impossible, but we can imagine it. We can talk about it. We can conceive of it. We can imagine infinite good and have been doing that for a while. It's not practical, but we can imagine infinite good. We can imagine being infinitely good the way that people do when they imagine God or Jesus or Buddha or whoever. And we can see where we fall short of that infinite good because we're stuck here as humans dealing with reality. So here we are kind of stretched between living in the real world and being legends in our own minds. And we have this fear of missing out. Like I said, past, present, and future threats and missed opportunities. The if-onlys that only we can do, other organisms can't do. They might have longing, they might have missing, they might feel absences. I'm sure they do. I'm not sure potato bugs do, but I'm sure dogs do. But they can't conceptualize it the way we can. It can't perseverate. They can't ruminate on it like, oh, if only I had said this to them, then they would have liked me instead of, why did I lose my girlfriend? What am I going to do about this? I am getting old. I can see it coming. These are not thoughts that dogs or primates, other organisms can have like we do. And I wish we'd stop denying it. I wish we'd stop distracting ourselves with the sense that it's arrogant to say we're different from other organisms, or that we're somehow the moral animal that always can do right because We have language and therefore we're rational and logical, what I call romantic humanism, the sense that because we have language, we could all be nice on the count of three. We have no more animal instinct. We transcended that. We can become enlightened and leave behind our animal past. None of that is the case. It's all a distraction. I'm just not interested in the social implications of, am I arrogant to say that we have language and other organisms don't? Or am I forgetting that we are transcendent and spiritual? No, none of that relevant. I want to understand what I am. And I am a creature who, from a long legacy of creatures struggling for its own existence, has an unconscious, unfelt, unthought, somatic experience. That is, I am struggling to stay alive without even conscious awareness of my attempts to do so. And then I've got this intense, convincing overlay of feelings, which I have in common with all other organisms. And then on top of that, I have the overlay of language. And they are all in cluster flux influence on each other. That is, I can have a thought, I often do at night, something that scares me, and it keeps my somatic body up. It agitates my feelings, which in turn changes my metabolism. And the other way around, I can have a stomach ache and end up having uncomfortable feelings that then I wrap thoughts around. It moves in all sorts of directions. It's a Mobius loops upon Mobius loops. It's really something to be human and have all of that going on in us. And what do you get when you cross convincing feelings with thoughts? You'll tend to get both the anxious thoughts and the compensatory thoughts. And that's where vanity fits in. That's why I say I'm egotistical. I'm just not vain and egotistical enough to pretend I'm not. I recognize that I am like a hummingbird for affirmation. And I would argue you are too. We all need what affirmation we can get. We don't leave affirmation on the table if we can say, at least I have this, or at least I don't have that. Anything that makes us feel comfort in our own skin, satisfaction in our own skin, we'll use euphemisms for it like love or kindness or beauty or spirit. But I think at core, it's an anxious human chronic need for reassurance. And maybe this is one of the reasons why we don't quite acknowledge the radical difference that language makes for humans. But if we did, we'd have to admit that we are an uncommonly anxious species, and we'd have to admit that we're needy. And we need to not feel needy. That's the paradox of it. To feel reassured, I cannot afford to see myself as needing reassurance. I want to feel like I'm cool, like I don't actually care, like I'm fine, like I'm okay, like I got it. I got this covered. I'm a grown-up. I'm not needy. I need to not feel needy. And I say this stuff in the first person, inviting you to join me in it. Because I'm saying, come on in, the water's fine. To admit this is the ultimate in irony. To admit that I'm an egomaniac, just not egomaniacal enough to pretend I'm not, is a kind of an ironic move. It's me noticing my ego and putting my cards on the table, noticing my vanity, putting my vanity on the table, and inviting you to do the same. Remember, from my perspective, irony is actually it's dire irony. It's tragic comic. It's deadly serious and ridiculous. That's what I think we're really dealing with, and that's what I deal with when I wrestle with my own vanity. That's what I'm inviting you to wrestle with, as I'm suggesting we could, which is to admit to it and then have to deal with it directly rather than denying it. So I assume that we are operating in a black market for vanity. I call it affirmationomics, the supply of and demand for affirmation that I think we all crave. Not all of us get it. We get used to the accommodation or affirmation we can get. Plenty of people can't afford to become egomaniacs or can't afford to in the real world and do it through religion, where they act like God is on their side and they've found that one true religion would be an example of how someone who can't afford much affirmation in real life might still get it through their imagination. And that's what I'm saying we humans can do. You could also call it economics, the supply and demand for ego strokes. I think we need to pay better attention to it because I think what we're struggling with now is basically vanity wars, escalating vanity wars. And again, I'll talk of it from my perspective, from my own active experience of it. As you might have guessed, I'm anti-Trumpist. I don't think they're a healthy movement for the sustainability of humankind. And I think they are jerking off in public. So just a grand vanity project circle jerk that happens to employ all the levers of infrastructure. And it feels very dangerous to me. I don't like it. Okay. But I could make a standard move, and I do to some extent, which is I laugh at those egomaniacs, those bullshit artist egomaniacs, and their indulgence in what I call scornography. Scornography would be pornography of scorn. That is, look at those people out there. Look at those libtard jerks. That's scornography. Because the liberals are so vain, so egotistical with their precious vanity wokeness, that proves that I'm selfless. That's what they're doing. So that's scornography for you. And I take in my share of scornography too. Look at those egomaniac MAGA people. They are so vain. Look at Trump. He is so vain. That he's vain proves I'm not. So these are the vanity wars. They're kind of like, since you're an egomaniac, it proves I'm selfless. No, you're the egomaniac. I'm selfless. And I'm saying that's a product of our bullshit, vain, in both senses of the word, claim that you could somehow transcend vanity, that you could simply pack it away because it doesn't make sense to be vain, to be ego attentive, like you could just transcend it. That's what I meant by romantic humanism, the sense that logically it doesn't make sense for me to be vain. It's folly. It's the rare pathology of deficient souls, those narcissists and gaslighters out there who, let's face it, you and I can recognize, but we're not like them. The fact that they're out there, those narcissists, proves that we aren't narcissists. I'm saying that vanity is vain. It's not working. It's not getting vanity under control. It just has a bunch of us denying that we're engaged in the black market, the affirmation-nomics market, and claiming that other people are indulging in it. Look over there, I'm reporting, mommy, he's being egotistical, that kind of thing. It's not helping. And in the meantime, the vanity wars are likely to just keep on growing. They've been with us since the beginning of language, I think. Tribalism has had it going on from the beginning, but it's really taking off with the media and now with AI. What are we worried about with AI? Lots of things. But one of the main things is that it's where people will go, like suckers, for their succor, for their affirmation. You can get a beautiful bot on there who affirms you for everything you want to believe and will outcompete other bots in their ability to flatter you, and you will become a legend in your own mind, and we will die of a brain fart. Be snuffed out by a brain fart because of what? Vanity. So do we think we can lobotomize it out? I don't think so. I don't see any sign of it. It is a direct side effect of having language, of having concepts, of therefore being worried about all sorts of things other creatures can't worry about, and therefore compensating for it with self-flattering pep talks. We need them. And the question becomes how to manage them safely. That's really what I'm driving at. If there's any hope for humankind, I think it comes from safe escapism, what I call off-jerking, what I call exercise, that is exercising your id. We call it the ego, but it's really the id. It's the I, me, vanity side of things. Exercise, strategic gullibility. I think that we need to reverse the poles on this and take it as a badge of honor and dignity that people watch movies, play video games, root for the heroes, feel excited by the anti-heroes, that people go to church and pretend that they are in God's arms. All of this optimal delusion, we need it. And we need to zip up after. We need it and we need to zip up after. We need to be able to take our flights of vanity, fancy, but always with a return ticket to reality secure in our heart pockets. We need to go far out. It's not how far out we go, it's whether we remember to come back. I don't think we can go on an austerity diet around vanity. It's not going to work. We've been trying that for 3,000 years. It just doesn't work. What you end up with is the egomaniacs who pretend that they're selfless because other people are selfish. That's what we keep on getting from that, is it's another place for vanity to play itself out. I'm saying we need to get much better at distinguishing fiction from reality and then indulging in the fiction. That's the best I can come up with. Here's why. Because the alternative I see for us is what I call the dissociation death spiral, or the dumbass death spiral. Fine with either name. But the dumbass is more psychological and the dissociation death spiral is more sociological. So I'll just describe it. Dissociation death spiral, reality gets rough, we get anxious, we check out into vanity fantasies, thereby neglecting reality, which in turn gets rougher, thereby motivating more anxiety, thereby causing more escapist delusion, until we are snuffed out by a brain fart. I do see that as the most likely prognosis for the extinction of civilization. And I'm astonished by how fast we're moving in that direction. And why? Because of the vanity wars. I mean, because the vanity wars have been an enormous distraction for all of human history, and we've about used up the Earth's carrying capacity for our self-flattering vanity stories played out in reality. So actually my model for all of this, and I lose some audience, I'm sure, for saying so, is masturbation. I grew up thinking that it was a very shameful act. I'm a little bit of my childhood history. My parents were loose, and they were the kind of 1960s parents who would have assumed that we had the story of the birds and the bees, me and my three brothers, at a relatively young age. But somehow I missed the story. I never quite got it. And so when I first discovered my capacity to masturbate and actually produce sperm, I thought I had maybe 400 loads in me, and that I better save some for when I was going to have kids. And yet I couldn't seem to stop. And I was quite ashamed of it. And for years after that, so my mother was totally surprised when I've been like 11 or 12, when she finally explained to me what's going on down there. And I realized, no, actually, I don't have 400 loads. It may be that I remember the 400 in retrospect because women have 400 eggs, more or less. Okay, but anyway, no, I spent lots of my childhood ashamed of it. And so if you wanted, you could just say, this is me compensating for it. But I actually think masturbation is a brilliant explanation for what goes on in safe escapism or optimal illusion. Not always, but it illustrates how it's normally done. So you close your eyes on reality, and you certainly close your eyes on seeing yourself closing your eyes. That is, you don't want to notice that you're doing this. And then you go into this kind of trance state where you dream of whatever is your ideal, and chances are you also imply that you're ideal enough to be able to access the ideal. For example, that you are a stud muffin or a hottie or whatever, okay? And then you do this thing and it relieves you, and then afterwards you zip up and you get back to reality. I think that is someone performing their civic duty. I feel the same way about someone going to church and then zipping up afterwards. I feel the same way about someone going to a death metal concert and pretending that they're some badass in cosplay and chanting lyrics that make them feel like they're superior to everybody else, exceptional, godlike, the hero, and then getting into their car afterwards and going back home and getting back to their job or their family. I think that's exactly what's going on at Trump rallies. I've been to one, and it's like a death metal concert. Everybody does that badassery thing, chanting lyrics they haven't thought about, they barely understand. That's not the point of them. It's the mouthfeel. They're chanting for the flavor, for the feeling of it, for the taste of those words. They're not actually thinking about what those words mean. That's totally fine. That vanity is being exercised. It's exercised. They're pretending that they're the kings of the world. None of that is a problem. The problem is what happens in the parking lot afterwards. Unlike the decent folks who go to the death metal concert, these guys come away feeling like they've experienced something more real than reality. And then they go out and start to turn basic infrastructure into their circle jerk vanity project. My problem with them is not that they take their flights of fancy. I dye my beard. I masturbate. I watch movies and think, ridiculous though it is, that I would do these things that the heroes do in movies. I have all sorts of vain exercise activities, and I think we all need them. I wish them for us all round, but zip up after. My number one point I try to get across to Trumpists is self-love is important, vanity is important, but get a room, don't let it go to your head, zip up after, and don't turn basic infrastructure into your circle jerk vanity project. How does that tie into irony? You got to see yourself two ways. You got to be able to look at yourself as dead serious, really trying, heroic even, and also kind of laughable for your desire to be heroic like that. I mean, I think about lines like, no, seriously, I'm just kidding, or that's my story and I'm sticking to it. It's a capacity for self-facing humor while taking yourself seriously. It's this serious, not serious, and trying to manage it in a way that isn't just dealing the cards to your vanity exclusively. What you notice about Trumpists and those kind of people in general is that anything serious they turn into a joke, and anything that's a joke they turn into serious. They tend to flip it, but what are they flipping it for? They're flipping it so the cards are always dealt to them. Whatever serves their vanity is dead serious. Whatever serves someone else's vanity, or someone who's not part of their team, is a joke. This is why they will scold you for not taking seriously their moral rules, but then laugh at you a second later for thinking that morality matters. This is why they play prude, punk. They alternate between them, but it's all self-dealing. The question here is, how do you engage your vanity? How do you exercise it without it turning into nothing but self-dealing? And here I'll just tie it into philosophy. Philosophy is a weird name for a field of research. It should be called sophology, the study of the nature of wisdom. What is wisdom? Not I love wisdom, which is a bumper sticker that any douchebag could claim. Any fool can claim they love wisdom. So why is it called philosophy? It took me a long time to figure out why I think it's called that, and it was hints from two resonant definitions of philosophy that I'd heard that finally gave me a sense of why it needs to be called philosophy, or why it's okay that it's called philosophy, even though I'm much more interested in sophology. The emergence and nature of wisdom, the emergence and nature of interpretation. So why is it called philosophy? Because you have to love wisdom more than you love yourself. You have to do something about your vanity if you're going to do it carefully. Bertrand Russell defines philosophy as a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. What is it stubborn against? It's stubborn against vanity. My favorite quote, almost my favorite quote in the whole wide world, is philosophers find their true perfection knowing the follies of humankind by introspection. Philosophers find their true perfection knowing the follies of humankind by introspection. That's a guy named Piet Hein. He's a mathematician and a good buddy of Niels Bohr and an ironist. Really interesting guy. And what I'm saying is there's a Buddhist line I liked. Truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing. And now that I think about it, I haven't thought about that line in a few years, but I did like it a lot. I don't see a way to uncloud our eyes of longing, but I do see a way to do it as a side thing. That is, our longing for affirmation is strong in us. I don't believe the Buddhists can transcend it. I've known quite a few of them, and I'm not convinced they're any further along in dealing with their vanity than I am, or normal people. But anyway, in transcending it, managing it maybe, but for me, what I can expect of normal people who don't have time to meditate until they manage it soberly is to manage it ironically. Get your yayas off and do it safely. It's not a question of how far out you go, but whether you remember to come back to reality. That I see as the best prospect for humankind, and that's also why I see irony as the truest medicine. If I can take myself seriously while also laughing at myself, and doing it in a way that is not just vanity self-serving, but is actually paying attention to the reality that is so easily clouded out by my natural born vanity. That's irony. That's what I'm trying to get at. Irony in dealing with vanity for sanity. All right, I'll be back again, I bet. Thanks for listening if you have.